I don't know if Brendan needs any introduction at this stage. He's the expert from the Galway City Museum, and he's done fabulous work researching all of those local events and people like Louis Darcy, especially things that are being commemorated around 100 years now. So without further ado, I think we'll let Brendan take over. Brendan, you're heartily welcome.
Great, thanks a million, everyone. It's great to see a big crowd here again this evening, even though I can't see. I suppose the first thing is to thank Heritage Society's Annaghdown and Donaghpatrick-Kilcoona for inviting me again this evening to do this. And it's great for me, you know, you spend so much time reading the stories and picking information together, you know, so it's nice to be able to share that rather than just let it go over the wayside or be stuck in a folder in the museum or stuck in a folder on the computer. So it's nice to get the opportunity to share some of the information and also hopefully to hear something back from people as well. And I think, and you can actually excuse me, I'm looking down here because I've got notes. I think it's interesting for me that Louis Darcy is someone who's highly regarded or at least feared by British intelligence, a man who was the subject of 2 local ballads and who is remembered on the Castlegar Republican Memorial on the outskirts of Galway. But despite all this, there's surprisingly little information out there about Louis Darcy. And indeed, what is out there, or what has been written about him, some of it's incorrect. So what I hope to do this evening is share some of the information that I've been able to unearth over the last couple of months about Louis Darcy. And I'm just going to share my screen now. Can everyone see that now?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. So to start, I suppose it's just a plug for the museum more than anything else. We're closed to the public at the moment, but I'm one of a team of people who co-curated our Revolution in Galway exhibition back in 2016. It's looked at the revolution from a Western perspective. A lot of what was happening over the country was focusing on Dublin, and we felt that Galway was being unrepresented. If you haven't had a chance to visit, hopefully we'll be open sometime next month. But some of the objects we have on display, and you can see one of them there, which is an ensign, which is a harp and Union Jack, which was flown when the King visited Galway in 1903. Just in the case there, if your screen is big enough, you'll make out a little red cap. That was made by Eamon Cant's sister for Eamon Cant, and he wore it while paying the uilleann pipes to the Pope in Rome in 1908. We also have a full collection of material belonging to Liam Mellows. Some personal items belong to Father Griffin. A volunteer's belt belonged to James Quirk, and a revolver belonged to a black and tan named Edward Crum, and another captured during the Merlin Park ambush. And my favorite, maybe the piece, is the smallest piece, is a chess piece carved by Liam Mellows on the evening of his execution in Mountjoy Jail. So some fascinating objects within that exhibition. And when we open again, if you want to come in as a group or individuals, I'd be glad to show you around. Now, to complement this exhibition and to mark the centenaries that have passed over the last year, the museum had planned to host a series of events and talks around the War of Independence in Galway. But the pandemic has stopped all that. So for the past number of months, since last summer, I've been working on a series of articles focusing on the stories behind some of the key incidents and personalities in the War of Independence in Galway. Now, these have been published on the museum website, on our social media channels, on the centenary anniversaries of the events, and some have been published in the Connacht Tribune and Connacht and City Tribune. Recently, we've been very lucky to apply for funding and be awarded funding under the 2021 Decade Centenaries programme. So all these articles will be collated, translated into Irish, and be made available in a bilingual publication early or later this year. So it'll be available for free for download from the museum website, and we'll have a limited print run as well. So just before I begin, you know, as I mentioned, there's very little written about Darcy. So what you're forced to do is to go far and wide to pull snippets from here, there, and everywhere, and then from all that information to try and create some coherent story about the life and times of Louis Darcy. So you're reliant on contemporary newspaper accounts, local and national, the reports of the military courts of inquiry into his death, which you would nearly describe as the official account of what happened to Louis Darcy. You've got a certain amount of information in the Bureau of Military History written statements, people who lived through the War of Independence but left their memories down 20 or 30 years later, long after that happened. You also have pension applications that would have a little bit of detail, and I managed to unearth some gems from there about Louis Darcy. Again, just little snippets of information. You also have the IRA's brigade activity reports in the period, which kind of shows different conflicts and engagements where people were involved in. Of course, you've got a number of really good books by Conor McNamara, Willie Henry, Cormac O'Corey, and David Leeson on the period, which focus on the West. And then a couple of songs which I'll finish tonight with as well, a couple of ballads written about Louis Darcy. And then finally, but not least, is the amount of information I gleaned from people, some of which attended the first lecture we did on the Kilroe ambush and had information to offer. And then the more difficult one has been of late is trying to track down college records for Louis Darcy, which has been difficult because they exist, but people don't have access to them at the moment. So I'm hoping that throughout the summer, I'll be able to get a look at those myself and be able to kind of confirm a little bit of the background story of Louis Darcy. The first piece of the story is, who was Louis Darcy? Well, Louis Darcy, well, his father was a guy called Nicholas Joseph Darcy, who was the son, as far as I can make out, a man by the name of John Darcy from Clonkeely near Headford. Nicholas was a school teacher and was previously married, before he was with Louis's mother, to another school teacher named Elizabeth or Lizzie Waldron, whom he married at Headford Chapel in 1879. They lived at Claren and had 4 children together. And there were John, Mary, Bridget, and Nicholas, who were born between 1880 and 1885. Sadly, Lizzie died in May 1886 when her youngest child was only 5 months old. And it was 8 years later, in 1894, that Nicholas remarried. And this time he married another school teacher, Mary A. Ford, and they married at Claren Chapel on the 11th of April, 1894. And they lived in Headford Town initially, where they had 7 children. So Louis was third. He was born Aloysius Raphael Darcy, quite a posh name, on the 20th of June, 1897 in Headford Town. He had 2 older sisters, Catherine and Agnes, and after him would come Peter, William, Francis, and Irene. They were all born in Headford. And in the 1901 census, we see that the family were living on the square in Headford. But by the 1911 census, they'd moved out to Carrigan, close to Clyde National School, where both his parents taught. So you can see there in the 1901 census, there was a mix of both families, Darcy's much older siblings and his own from the second marriage as well. But they all lived together on the square in Headford before moving out closer to Clyde National School. And one of the interesting things about the Darcys is their interest in the Irish language. Both his parents are Irish language enthusiasts, and I'm not sure how big your screen is here, but if you can see the post on the left there, it comes to the Kerry Evening Post from the 10th of August 1899, and here we see that Nicholas Darcy was recognised at the Gaelic League's National Cultural Festival, the Oireachtas or the Oireachtas, coming in 3rd place for the National School teachers with the most passes in Irish amongst their pupils. So that's 1899. And 3 years later, we see in Clive Sullish that both Nicholas and Mary are devoting 2.5 hours each a week to the teaching of Irish at Clyde National School to both the boys and girls. And it's interesting to see there, and the figures might be a little grainy on your, if you're looking at a smaller device, but there are 120 children enrolled in the school between boys and girls. They have 80 regular attendees, and of their regular attendees, the 80 of them are taking Irish, which is far, far more than most schools that are mentioned in the list there. So there's a keenness amongst his parents for the Irish language. Here we have a gem of a photograph that was brought to my attention by Tim Collins, who I'd like to thank. And it's Clyde National School, the boys at Clyde National School, taken in 1911. Now, if you can make it out, that has to be Louis Darcy's father on the right-hand side. Very, very faded, the figure there. He was principal in the school at the time. And having compared photographs of Louis as a man and other ones of him as a boy and consulted with family members, I'm fairly certain that Louis is the boy in the back row on the left-hand side. And I'm just going to show you why I think it is. See these two. This is Louis as a man, And this is who I think Louis is a boy. They're quite similar. I also have access, which I didn't include this evening, to a lovely photograph of Louis in his Holy Communion outfit. And it's clear that that is the same boy from that. So that is the photograph there. So Louis attended Clyde National School, even when he was living in town. He attended Clyde National School from 1901 till 1913. And after that, he continued his education at St. Joseph's College in Ballinasloe, known as the Pines, before he moved to Dublin to study law at university. I suspect that he studied at Trinity, but their archive staff are working remotely at the moment, so I've not been able to confirm this. I have checked with UCD, he's not on the record books there. It has been incorrectly stated elsewhere, most recently in the new book, The Dead of the Irish Revolution, that he was a medical student, but this seems to be based on a solitary statement given to the Bureau of Military History. Now, I've checked the Royal College of Surgeons, and they have no record of an Aloysius or Louis Darcy as a medical student there. And there's another reason I'll mention in a second why I think he's a law student. Either way, it seemed that Darcy had a promising professional career ahead of him. Now, in February 1917, Louis's father died suddenly while at school. The Western People newspaper reported that on Monday, the 18th of February, that Mr. Nicholas Darcy, teacher of Clyde Boys' School, stood at the door. In the act of calling in his little flock from the playground, he fell backwards unconscious and in a few minutes breathed his last. The pupils, terrified at the sudden death, fled home, and after a brief period, his remains were removed to his residence. He had been principal of the school for 20 years, and since the introduction of the Irish language into the national schools, he has been most successful. At that time, Louis was almost 20 years of age and was probably at the university in Dublin. And after the death of his father, it was Louis's mother took over as principal of the school and remained so until 1934. Now, while a student in Dublin, in the capital, Darcy became a member of C Company, 3rd Battalion of the Dublin Brigade of the Irish Volunteers. This was the battalion that had occupied Boland's Bakery under Raymond de Valera during the Easter Rising of 1916. In June 1918, up to 100 members of this company were drilling at the Workmen's Club on York Street in Dublin, when it was raided by a force of 60 members of the Dublin Metropolitan Police, who were supported by the military, so they had lorries waiting outside. Now, unluckily for Darcy, there was 100 members there. They fled in different directions, and 23 men in total, including Darcy, were arrested and charged with illegal drilling under the Defence of the Realm regulations. The prisoners who refused to recognise the court were sentenced to 2 months imprisonment, which they served at Mountjoy Jail and at Crumlin Road Jail in Belfast. The Irish Independent reported that they cheered and sang God Save Ireland as they left the dock. And on his release, after his 2 months inside, Darcy was apparently refused re-entry to university. And so his promising professional career came to an abrupt end. After that, Darcy seems to disappear from the record. I can't find anything from after that. And he next comes to light during the War of Independence in Galway. So by way of an introduction, I'll give a quick overview of the War of Independence in this part of the country. On the 21st of January 1919, following the general election, the Sinn Féin MPs established a breakaway parliament, Dáil Éireann, in Dublin, and began the process of creating a counter-state. On that same day, some Irish volunteers ambushed a party of RIC policemen in County Tipperary, killing 2. The timing was purely coincidental, but the event has come to symbolise the start of what is known as the War of Independence, the Anglo-Irish War, or sometimes the Tan War. In the early phase of the War of Independence, the Irish Volunteers, or Irish Republican Army in Galway, and in Connacht more generally, seemed reluctant to act against Crown forces. In fact, there was no policeman shot dead in Connacht until July 1920. Now, between January and May 1920, the IRA in Galway burned a number of unoccupied RIC barracks and launched attacks on 3 of the remaining stations. That was Castle Hackett near Carlistran in January, Castle Grove near Tuam in March, and Lough George near Claregalway in May. Gradually, the RIC withdrew from much of the countryside, And kind of the result of this is you can see that in January 1920, there were 415 RIC men spread out amongst 46 RIC stations in Galway West Riding. And that Galway West Riding includes kind of that triangular area from Galway to Tuam to Headford. And by March 1921, it was reduced to 408 policemen in just 19 barracks. So that had been reduced from 46 to 19 barracks in that short period. In many ways, it was a social war rather than a military one that was being waged against the RIC. The police were being undermined and impeded by the Irish Volunteers, or IRA, and shunned by the community. And as a result, in June 1920, the RIC County Inspector reported that, and I quote, "The old form of police control is practically beaten to the ropes." Of course, about this time, the RIC were boosted by the arrival of new, mostly British recruits, the so-called black and tans, who were RIC men wearing mixed police and army uniforms, and the auxiliaries, who were a paramilitary force of ex-British army and navy officers. Things in Galway would take a turn for the worse in the summer of 1920. Between the IRA's gala ambush near Tuam on the 19th of July and the end of the year, 18 people lost their lives in Galway as a result of the War of Independence, with two others, Blake Cullinan from Lacca, who was fatally wounded on Bloody Sunday, and Commandant Joe Howley of Oranmore being killed in Dublin. Among those killed in Galway were RIC Constable Martin Foley, who was killed in an IRA ambush at Burnham Park, volunteers Sean Mulvoy and Seamus Quirk, who were shot dead in the city in separate incidents on the same night, Father Michael Griffin, who was abducted from his home in the city, found dead in a bog in Barna a week later, Michael Walsh, a Sinn Féin councillor and businessman, who was taken from his workplace, shot and thrown into the Corrib, Eileen Quinn, a young expectant mother, who was shot outside her home by passing auxiliaries, Patrick Joyce, who was abducted and killed by the IRA, and the Loughnane brothers, who were tortured and killed by Crown forces. All these are shocking incidents, but of course, the violence was far, far more widespread than that. Countless others were arrested, interrogated, flogged, beaten, intimidated, had their hair cropped. Others suffered as their homes and crops were burned or their animals were shot and killed. And it's against this backdrop that Darcy reappears again in Galway. Having received a special commission from the IRA's general headquarters, Darcy returned to Galway as an organiser in order to stir up activity locally. He served as Commandant of the Headford Battalion, an independent unit that was not at that stage affiliated with any brigade. Now, that said, Darcy was regularly in touch with other volunteers, probably in his capacity as an IRA organiser. One member of Commandant named Julia Erner of Annaghdown, she carried dispatches 2 or 3 times a month from Louis Darcy to Baby Duggan of Castlecar, Thomas Baby Duggan of Castlecar, who was quartermaster of the Mid-Galway Brigade. And she recalls that she used to cycle a round trip of 26 miles at night time to deliver messages between the men. The Headford Battalion, made up of companies from Clooneen, Claren, and Carlostrand, would eventually become formally attached to the Mid-Galway Brigade. But as I said, Louis Darcy seemed to run the show and deal directly with Dublin rather than locally. Now, by reputation, Darcy was a fearless and determined Republican who instilled loyalty in his men. One of his comrades wrote that, and I quote, "The music of the rifles have always been ringing in my ears since the day Commandant Louis Darcy handed me his revolver and said, 'Hold this, rather than part with it, lose your life first.' This I was determined to do." And these lines were written by Hubert Collins of Creelkill, an anti-treaty Republican, the night before he was executed by the Irish Free State at Athlone Barracks in January 1923. And for those of you who were who'd attended the lecture on the Kilroe ambush, he was his older brother was Thomas, who was killed by Crown forces following the Kilroe ambush. Now, in mid-October 1920, Louis Darcy, the home of Louis Darcy, was raided by members of the Crown forces who were acting on information received. They raided the family home. Louis wasn't there, but they found gelignite and ammunition, including a large quantity of dum-dum bullets. So afterwards, Louis Darcy was forced to go on the run. Now, it's interesting that a man by the name of Jack Feehan of the West Connemara Brigade IRA, he was quartermaster of the West Connemara Brigade, he claimed that Darcy took part in the Bloody Sunday attacks in Dublin on the British intelligence network on the 21st of November, so a month after his home was raided. Now, shortly after Bloody Sunday, Feehan was arrested in Dublin for breaking curfew. He told Ernie O'Malley that 3 times he was identified as Louis Darcy in a lineup. He also said that Darcy was wounded in the foot on Bloody Sunday when he was shot by the supposed wife of an officer in Mount Street. Now, it's an interesting story, but I can't corroborate that with anywhere else. But it's interesting that Jack Feehan had given that account to Ernie O'Malley. Now, we do know that life as a fugitive would have been difficult, especially during the winter months, but it was made somewhat easier thanks to the efforts of local members of Commandant. One member, Florrie Quinn from Craigboy, nursed Darcy when he was suffering from suspected pneumonia. Another, Julia Erner of Annaghdown, who we've already mentioned, she regularly brought food and clothing to Darcy and other wanted men who were staying in dugouts in the Clydea area that winter. So not easy to be living out in sod ditches over the winter months by the Corrib. Julia also carried out important intelligence work locally. She recalled in her pension statement, "I used to go in and get in touch with girls who would keep in company with police, and they used to find out for me who the police were after." Recalling that Louis was a man they greatly wanted, she gathered and passed on information about planned house raids which prevented Louis's capture. Apparently, Louis's mother used to use a candle in one of the upstairs windows of the teacher's house in which she lived to signal to her son whether it was safe to enter the house or if Crown forces were watching. And apparently, for many years afterwards, there was a burn mark on top of on the windowsill, on the inside of the windowsill, where the candles were kept. None of the auxiliaries, in January 1921, Darcy instigated an IRA ambush against a party of auxiliaries at Kilroe between Galway and Headford, which was carried out by volunteers from Castlegar, Galway, and Annaghdown under the direction of Mick Newell and Baby Duggan of Castlegar. Darcy instructed Julia Erner of Commandant to go to a prearranged site near the ambush, a prearranged place near the ambush site with bandages to tend to any potentially injured volunteers. Now, none of the auxiliaries were killed in the attack, but several were wounded. But the reprisals were very severe locally. Houses and crops were burned and 4 men were killed, as we know. Although Darcy didn't take part in the actual attack, the British authorities were convinced of his involvement and regarded him as a significant threat. Years later, in his autobiography entitled A Winter's Tale, Sir Ormond Winter, and he was head of British intelligence in Ireland during the War of Independence, he went so far as to refer to Darcy as the Michael Collins of the West. And I doubt he meant that as a compliment. Around this time, it seemed that Darcy was being watched by the authorities as well. Geraldine Dillon, who was a sister of Joseph Plunkett, the leader executed after 1916, wrote that every fortnight Louis Darcy used to walk from Galway out along the Clifton railway line to meet John Geoghegan of Moycullen, who was quartermaster of the East Connemara Brigade. According to Dillon, they were watched by a member of the Crown Forces who hid in a big bushy lime tree near Dangan House on the outskirts of Galway City. Now, on the 23rd of March 1921, Darcy made his way across the fields to Oranmore railway station, accompanied by a man named Lally, who I've not been able to find out anything more about. And they were to attempt to catch the 8:20 a.m. train to Dublin. Now, there's an interesting anecdote given to me by Tim Collins. The places Darcy at Craig's Castle near Collarndulla on the night before. He apparently approached one of the servant girls looking for food. Now, the purpose of Louis' trip to Dublin was to make contact with Michael Collins about a shipment of arms that had come west and gone astray. The IRA was desperately short of weapons and ammunition at the time, and it was hampering their efforts. And it was usually a case that you would have to fundraise using your own money, send your money to headquarters in Dublin, and then bring your weapons down west or have your weapons shipped west. So, you know, if you lost a shipment of weapons, you were down the money and you were down the weapons as well. So both Lally and Darcy were dressed as farm labourers so as not to attract anyone's attention. Another anecdote tells that Darcy was wearing a shirt and tie belonging to his childhood friend Bill Craven of Clyde when he was captured. Fortunately for Darcy, Crown forces had been tipped off about his plans, or so it seems, and afterwards it was rumored that Darcy's jilted girlfriends had turned informer, and I've heard this from a number of sources. Before they could board the train at Oranmore, they were stopped and questioned by local police. The two men who gave false names were arrested and taken to Oranmore Police Barracks for identification. Now, in her memoir, Geraldine Dillon wrote that Lally, and I quote, heard Darcy screaming with the torture all night from the next room. The following day, Holy Thursday, Darcy was handed over to the auxiliaries for transportation to Galway. The official account of what happened next is that Darcy was travelling in the back of a Crossley tender when the car in front broke down at Merlin Park near Galway, or the woods near Merlin Park, bringing the convoy to a halt. One of the guards, a man by the name of Cadet John Loeb, stated that Darcy jumped onto the road and started running for a gap in the wall. We called out to halt. He did not halt, and we fired at him. He dropped. Coincidentally or not, 4 months previously, almost to the day, the same Cadet Lowe was one of those who shot and killed Michael Moran, Commandant of the Headford Battalion IRA, when he allegedly tried to escape in Galway. And that same Cadet Lowe stole a car during the Galway races of 1921, was imprisoned and sacked from the force later that year. By contrast with the official line, Geraldine Dillon wrote that just outside Galway town, Darcy was tied with a rope and dragged behind a lorry until a tan kindly put a bullet in him. Volunteer Thomas Hine gave a very similar version of events to the Bureau of Military History. Now, whether or not Darcy's or Dillon's disturbing version of events was true, the official account was widely disbelieved locally. Many saw Darcy's killing as revenge for the death of Martin Foley, a police constable stationed at Oranmore who had been shot and killed by the IRA at Merlin Park 7 months previously, almost at the exact spot where Louis Darcy was shot. Now, the verdict of the military inquiry, which took place in the days after Darcy's killing, said that Darcy met his death from gunshot wounds fired by the police in the execution of their duty while he was trying to escape from arrest. Unusually and suspiciously, there was no medical evidence given to the inquiry. Normally, this would have been the case where there would be a doctor who would have inspected the court and given a report on it, but there's no evidence. And you would think that that doctor's evidence would have proven or dispelled the rumours that Darcy had been tortured and dragged on the road before he was killed. The Irish Independent reported that Darcy was the 60th person, that's 60, to be killed in such circumstances. Neville Macready, the Commander-in-Chief of British Forces in Ireland, noted on the file that the death would probably not have occurred if the prisoner had been handcuffed or properly secured. When the verdict was reported in the House of Commons on the 13th of April, one Liberal MP asked the question, with regards to the deaths of William McCarthy and Louis Darcy, may I ask whether it is a case that the reason of shot while attempting to escape is not accepted in Ireland or in England to any extent, but is looked upon as simply a cover for cold-blooded murder in too many cases? He received no reply to his question. Now, Darcy's body was returned to his family for burial at Carrigan Cemetery near Headford. According to local lore, the tricolour, which was draped over its coffin, was hastily made from a flag of the local Corb Shamrocks Gaelic Football Club, as it was impossible to get suitable material elsewhere at such short notice. On the night before the burial, so as not to draw the unwanted attention of Crown forces, Darcy's comrades entered St. Mary's Church at Claren and placed the tricolour on the coffin. It was said the members of the Crown forces who attended the funeral in large numbers pulled the flag from the coffin before they wrestled back by the mourners. And this same flag covered Darcy's mother's coffin in 1938. In the aftermath, Archbishop Gilmartin of Tuam, who was a vocal critic of violence on both sides, appealed to the young men of the diocese to continue to abstain from the deeds of blood no matter what the provocation, and to imitate the patience of Christ. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. Believing that the two members of the RIC stationed at Headford had identified Darcy, the local IRA began plotting a revenge attack on the barracks. The attack took place at the end of April 1921. It was unsuccessful, but it just goes to show that the cycle of violence will continue. Now, the headstone at Carrigan Cemetery, shown in the photograph here, was unveiled at the end of August in 1955, following Mass at Claren Church. After the Mass, a procession marched to the cemetery, where the headstone was formally unveiled by Tom McGuire, who commanded the South Mayo Flying Column during the War of Independence. Here you can see the photograph on your left shows the revolutionary veterans of the unveiling of the Castlegar Republican Memorial, which was unveiled on the Tuam Road on Easter Sunday, 1951. And if your screens are big enough, you'll be able to see that Louis Darcy's name in Irish appears on the second line from the bottom there. It's interesting that this base where the inscription is once stood in Ayr Square. It held a bronze statue of Lord Dunkellin, the former MP for Galway Borough and Galway County. The bronze statue, which was created by the same guy who did the statue of Daniel O'Connell on O'Connell Street in Dublin. And the statue of Dunkellin was hacked from its plinth in 1922 and dumped into the River Corrib. The empty base remained in Ayr Square for more than a decade, and there was a proposal to put the statue of O'Connor sitting on top of it, which would have been completely wrong setting for Chanforic. Now, finally, I just want to make mention of, excuse me, two ballads written, two locally composed and contemporary ballads written in memory of Louis Darcy. One is The Lament for Louis Darcy by John Heenan, late of Tuam, and the other one is The Commandant, Louis Darcy beside Clyde Bay by William McHugh of Ballycasey near Headford. The ballads are often misnamed and misattributed, but I'm pretty sure I have them right here. John Heenan was born in the parish of Annaghdown, but spent many years living in Tuam. He was involved in the Republican movement during the War of Independence, so would have been familiar with Darcy's story. He composed his lament in 1922, which concludes with the following lines. It was on Good Friday evening, his comrades came to pray around their commandant's coffin, whilst in the church he lay. The day our Saviour died for us, the peelers murdered Lou. But we pray, O Lord, be merciful, they know not what they do. Receive the soul of him who died, young in the life you gave, who bore his wounds for Ireland's cause to his lonely Carrigan grave. And amongst the other compositions by John Heenan is the lovely Sweet Woodlands of Our, which was recorded by Mac Keane on his 2008 album Pictures in Time. Now, the more popular of the two ballads was composed by Willie McHugh, and it was entitled Commandant Louis Darcy beside Clyde Bay, but it's known by other names, just Louis Darcy or Clyde Bay sometimes. It was recorded by Mac Keane Sr. and released under the title Louis Darcy on the acclaimed Keane family album of 1985, which has since been reissued by Gail Lynn. From farm and stock, McHugh was born at Ballycasey near Headford in October 1883. He served as captain of the Kilcoona Company of the IRA during the War of Independence. Following the Kilroe ambush in 1921, the McHugh farmhouse in Haggard was torched by Crown forces. Like many Republican veterans, McHugh spoke little of his experiences, but according to his family, he was once captured, tied with ropes and dragged along the road by horses. And for his own safety, he was forced to sleep in a cavity in a stone wall in a field near the family home. McHugh was a musician and composer of ballads who instilled a love of traditional music in his children. He composed his ballad around 1922, while the tragedy was still fresh in people's minds. Given his Republican activities and his proximity to Headford, McHugh is likely to have known Darcy personally, which is probably what inspired him to compose his song. And if you look at the two images on the left, if you can see them clearly, the first one is, the one on the left is the first three verses of McHugh's ballad, as dictated to his youngest daughter, Frances. And on the right-hand side is a street ballad. So it's printed in street ballad format and distributed as well. So that's why it's so well known, apart from the recording by the Keane family. And just finally, before I play this tune, James Connolly believed that such compositions, ballads and poems, were one of the hallmarks of a widely supported revolution. He once wrote that, and I quote, "No revolutionary movement is complete without its poetical expression. If such a movement has caught hold of the imagination of the masses, they will seek a vent in song for the aspirations, the fears and the hopes, the loves and the hatreds engendered by the struggle. Until the movement is marked by the joyous, defiant singing of revolutionary songs, it lacks one of the distinctive marks of popular revolutionary movement. It is the dogma of a few and not the faith of the multitude." So it was important that songs like this were composed to reflect, the widespread support of the struggle. So what I'm going to do now is just play you Willie McHugh's song. I don't have a recording of the other one, but Willie McHugh's song, which has been sung by Mac Keane Sr., and this has kindly been, we've been given permission to play this evening by Gail Lynn. So here it is.
Weep not for the noble, their kind and true-hearted, that high-minded youth that now moulders to clay, not terror to England and our high crown forces, was the daring Lord Darcy from beside Clydach Bay. Na young man a promise in business in Dublin, was returning to Clydach and nowhere dismayed, for his aim and ambition was to rise a battalion and to die like a soldier the North Galway Brigade. Success made his effort, but sad was that story. Near Oranmore station, he was captured one day, and surrounded by tens and the high crown forces, while trying to escape was shot down on the way. 'Twas little he dreamed when he left his fond mother, and it's little he knew when he bade her goodbye, that an angel of death was awaiting his footsteps, all alone and unarmed, that he would die. For brave men have fought, and brave men have fallen, and brave men have suffered and died for the cause. But a braver martyr than the dear and Lord Darcy ever died for the rights of a republic in law. So farewell, our Commandant, we will never forget you. Although you've gained honor in a high-handed way, but the cause that you died for, we will always keep fighting, and your memory shall hover around sweet Clydach Bay.
And that's it. So that's the story of Louis Darcy, as I've been able to figure out so far. As I said, I'm hoping over the summer months that we'll be able to round out that story if I can get records from Trinity College to confirm. But it seems from his prison record, which I showed early, the prison record and the newspaper reports at the time said that he was a law student. So it's just a matter of finding out exactly where he was a law student and when he left the college and what were the reasons. See if we can kind of piece together that piece of the story. But I'm fairly certain it was Trinity College, and I'm just waiting for them to come back to me. So what I'd like, and I'm not sure if anyone has any extra information or anything else to offer, but you know, if I've something incorrect, I'd love to hear it. If you have something more to add, I'd love to hear that too. Because as I said, later in the year, we're going to take all these articles and make them into a bilingual publication, and it'll be Galway City Museum's I suppose, contribution to the commemorative events of the War of Independence.
That's fabulous work, Brendan. Thank you so much for that very informative talk. And thanks also to Paul and Irene and Claire. And if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm sure Brendan would be only delighted.
Absolutely.